Under an unyielding cloak of twilight, the village of Ealdor lay silent but for the rhythmic clanging of a hammer against steel. Nestled in a forgotten nook of the world, bordered by the ancient, whispering woods known as the Veil Wood, the village was untouched by the passage of day into night. For as long as the villagers could remember, the sky above had been an eternal canvas of deep purples and blues, painted with the broad strokes of an everlasting solar eclipse. Aelric, a young blacksmith with arms as sturdy as the oak trees guarding his village, worked diligently in his forge. His muscles flexed under the glow of the forge fire, each swing of his hammer shaping the red-hot metal into a blade that gleamed with promise. Aelric's mind wandered as he worked. Will any of these blades ever taste battle, or are they doomed to hack away at stubborn wood and errant weeds? He often wondered about the wider world, about the adventures recounted by the occasional traveler who wandered through Ealdor. Yet, his life was here, among the sparks and steel. The village itself was a tight-knit mosaic of thatched cottages and cobblestone paths, each element worn smooth by familiarity. The villagers moved with a quiet certitude, each person a thread woven seamlessly into the fabric of community life. At the heart of this tapestry was the marketplace, a bustling, vibrant gathering place during the day where folks shared news as freely as they traded goods. As the sun dipped lower, or at least as the dimming light suggested, Aelric finished his work and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding forest and the faintest hint of lavender from Eldor's garden next door. He inhaled deeply, appreciating the calm. This is enough, he assured himself. But the part of him that thrilled at the travelers' tales knew he longed for something more. Ealdor's children played in the dying light, their laughter piercing the twilight gloom. They chased each other around the well in the center of the village square, their games echoing the legends of old, tales of heroes and monsters, of battles fought in the shadows of the same trees that stood watch over them now. Aelric's gaze drifted to the edge of the village where the Veil Wood loomed. The trees stood like sentinels, their trunks thick and their branches gnarled, as if writhing in slow, silent agony. The woods were both a shield and a curtain, hiding the village from the outside world and perhaps protecting the world from what lay within. "Thinking of venturing out, Aelric?" The voice belonged to Master Aelric, the village's elder blacksmith and Aelric's mentor. His face was lined with the soot and wisdom of years spent by the forge. Aelric smiled, shaking his head. "And leave all this? Who would keep you from burning down the forge, master?" Aelric chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ah, my boy, the fire in you is too bright for just anvils and arrows. Remember, the world is vast, and the stories you hear are but whispers of its wonders." As twilight deepened into an impenetrable velvet dusk, Aelric pondered Ulric's words. The village might be his heart, but the unknown called to his soul, a siren song woven through the hammering of metal and the crackling of fire. Little did he know, as stars began to prick the eternal twilight, that the forge of his destiny was heating, and soon he would be thrust into a tale of his own, far beyond the cobbled streets of Ealdor. As night enfolded Ealdor in its embrace, the usual tranquility of the village was shattered by a storm that brewed as if conjured by the ancients themselves. Dark clouds swirled overhead, merging with the perpetual twilight to cast an even deeper shadow over the land. The wind howled like the chorus of the damned, a foreboding melody that swept through the cobblestone streets and rattled the timbers of the thatched cottages. Aelric stood at his doorway, his eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight that struggled against the darkening gloom. The storm's sudden arrival was unusual, but more unsettling was the electric charge in the air, a palpable tension that seemed to whisper of impending change. This is no ordinary storm, he thought, a mix of apprehension and intrigue tightening in his chest. Compelled by a force he couldn't explain, Aelric made his way to his father's old workshop at the edge of the village. The building was little more than a shack now, cloaked in ivy and shadow, largely untouched since his father's passing years ago. As he pushed open the creaking door, the smell of dust and old metal greeted him, familiar yet filled with secrets. Inside, the storm's fury seemed distant, muffled by the thick stone walls. Aelric's torch cast long shadows as he moved deeper into the workshop, each step stirring memories of his father, the village's once celebrated blacksmith. He was drawn to an old, worn tarp in the corner of the room, under which lay the last project his father had worked on, a project abandoned abruptly after his sudden illness. Lifting the heavy cloth, Aelric uncovered a large, ornate chest. It was unlike his father's usual plain, functional style. Intricate carvings adorned its surface, depicting scenes of celestial alignments and mythical creatures, their details dancing eerily in the torchlight. With a tentative hand, Aelric opened the chest. Inside, nestled within a velvet lining, lay a sword. Its blade shimmered with an unnatural light, untouched by rust despite the years of neglect. As Aelric reached out, his hand trembling with a mix of fear and fascination, his touch on the hilt ignited a luminous glow from within the blade. It felt as if the sword recognized him, acknowledged him as its rightful heir. At that moment, the storm outside intensified, as though reacting to the sword's awakening. The walls groaned under the assault of the wind, and through the din, Aelric heard a chilling sound, whispers, faint but distinct, carried on the breeze. They spoke in a language he did not know, yet the message was clear. They were coming. Aelric grasped the sword, feeling its power surge through him, a power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. What have I awakened? He wondered, a heavy sense of destiny settling upon his shoulders. He knew then that his life would never be the same. The stories of old were not just tales. They were warnings, and he was now part of a legacy that intertwined with the very fate of Ealdor. As he stepped out of the workshop, the storm seemed to acknowledge his acceptance of the sword. The wind calmed, the clouds parted slightly, allowing a few stars to peek through, watching him like eyes in the sky. Aelric looked towards the Valewood, its shadows seeming less menacing, more inviting. He was no longer just a village blacksmith. He was a guardian of something ancient and powerful. With the sword by his side, Aelric returned to the village, the weight of his inheritance in his hand and a new resolve kindling in his heart. The game of heroes and monsters was no longer just a children's tale. It was his reality now, and he was ready to play his part. The dawn that followed the storm was of a kind not seen in Ealdor for generations. A sliver of golden light breached the endless twilight, casting a pale, otherworldly glow across the village. The villagers emerged from their homes, blinking in surprise at the rare sight of the sun's rays, a momentary breach in the eternal eclipse that cloaked their world. Aelric, with the ancient sword at his side, felt every curious eye upon him as he walked through the village square. The blade, now sheathed but still radiant with a faint inner light, seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heart. The whispers of the night had not faded with the storm. They lingered in the morning air, murmurs hidden in the rustle of the leaves and the creak of the old wooden signs. Master Aelric met him at the forge, his expression a mix of concern and awe. "That sword, where did you find such a thing?" he asked, his voice low, as if afraid to wake an unseen presence. "In Father's workshop," Aelric replied, his hand subconsciously resting on the hilt. "It was his last project, it seems. Hidden away all these years." His mind teemed with questions, the most pressing of which danced frustratingly out of reach. Why did he never speak of it? What power does it hold? As they spoke, a chill breeze swept through the square, carrying with it a shadow that seemed to watch with unseen eyes. The villagers, sensing the change, gathered closer, their morning routines forgotten. Aelric noticed their unease. It mirrored his own. "It's no ordinary blade," Master Aelric continued, his fingers brushing the intricate carvings on the scabbard. "It's older than any tale we've told here, marked by the ancients themselves. You must guard it well, Aelric. Such artifacts are not meant for the hands of ordinary men." Aelric nodded, feeling the weight of his mentor's words. He sensed the sword's power, a dormant force awaiting a spark. Am I the guardian it awaits? Or its prisoner? He wondered silently. As the day progressed, the phenomena of the morning light faded, and the village once again sank into the familiar gloom of the eclipse. But the brief daylight had stirred something else, a sense of impending change that the villagers could not ignore. Whispered stories began to circulate, tales of spectral figures seen flitting through the Valewood at the edge of their vision. By nightfall, the whispers had transformed into warnings. Aelric stood at the edge of the village, his gaze fixed on the darkening woods. The Valewood seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. It was as if the storm had been a herald, and now the true test was about to begin. "I heard them last night," whispered a voice behind him. Elda, the herb woman, approached, her eyes wide with fear. "The spirits, or whatever they are, spoke of the Valewood awakening. They seek something, or someone." Aelric turned to face her, his resolve hardening. "They seek this sword, I believe. My father must have known they would come for it one day." His voice was steady, but inside doubt gnawed at him. "What am I to do against spirits and ancient forces?" "You are not alone in this," Ealdor reassured him, placing a gnarled hand on his arm. "This village may be small, but it is strong. We stand with you, Aelric." That night, as darkness enveloped the village, Aelric couldn't sleep. He sat by his fire, the sword lying across his knees, watching the flames dance and twist. His thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and determination. He knew the tranquility of Ealdor was shattered. Now, he must rise to defend his home, not just from the threats lurking in the shadows of Valewood but also from the doubts lurking within himself. The game of heroes and monsters was indeed no mere children's tale. It was his reality. And as the fire crackled into the night, Aelric felt the sword pulse once more, as if affirming his unspoken commitment to guard and to fight. As twilight reclaimed its dominion over the brief daylight, a palpable tension settled over Ealdor. Aelric, his mind fraught with the weight of destiny, felt the ancient sword hum with a mysterious energy, an unspoken promise of battles to come. The villagers, once buoyed by the unusual morning light, now congregated near the forge, their faces etched with concern. Aelric stood before them, the sword displayed across his palms, its surface catching the last of the twilight and reflecting it as if it held a fragment of the day within. "This sword is not just my inheritance," he began, his voice resonant with newfound authority. "It is, perhaps, our only shield against the darkness that encroaches upon our lands from the Valewood." Master Aelric, standing by his side, nodded solemnly. "We've seen the signs, heard the whispers of the woods. The Valewood stirs, and with it, the shadows lengthen. It's no coincidence that this blade has come to light now." The gathering murmured, some with fear, others with a rising sense of duty. From the back of the crowd, a new figure approached. Clad in a cloak that seemed to shift with shadows not cast by any light, her presence was almost ethereal. The crowd parted, some recoiling at her approach. She stopped a few paces away from Aelric, her gaze piercing. "Your father knew of what was to come," she said, her voice a soft cascade of chilling certainty. "He knew that the sword was not just a weapon but a key that could open doors better left closed." Aelric tightened his grip on the sword, his resolve hardening. "Who is this stranger?" he thought, wary of her knowledge. "And who are you, to speak of my father's intentions?" The woman lifted her head, revealing features of an ageless beauty marred by a hard, piercing gaze. "I am Morrigan, once a guardian of the balance between your world and what lies beyond the Valewood. Your father and I were both sworn to protect this realm from the chaos that now seeks to engulf it." The name Morrigan sent a ripple through the villagers. Tales of a sorceress guardian were woven into the folklore of Ealdor, tales Aelric had thought mere fables to entertain children at night. Morrigan stepped closer, her eyes never leaving the sword. "This blade can seal the breach that has been opened. But it can also widen it, beckoning forth powers that you cannot fathom." Aelric looked around at his fellow villagers, seeing their fear, feeling his own pulse quicken. "Can I wield this power? Must I, The sword felt heavier, a burden of legacy and battle. You must choose wisely, blacksmith, Morrigan continued, her tone both a warning and a plea. Many eyes watch Ealdor now, some filled with greed, others with desperation. As night fully enveloped the village, the first of the spectral apparitions that had been but whispered rumors appeared, flitting between the shadowed buildings like lost souls. The villagers gasped, drawing closer together. Aelric stepped forward, the sword in hand, its glow intensifying as if in response to the presence of the spirits. I will defend this village, Aelric declared, his voice ringing out in the chill night air. With or without aid, I will not let darkness fall upon us. Morrigan watched him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Then let us prepare, for the night is long and full of terrors that will test the mettle of your blade and heart alike. That night, as Aelric walked the perimeter of Ealdor with Morrigan at his side, he felt the ancient power of the sword pulse against the darkness. Together, they began to devise a plan, not just to defend but to strike at the heart of the shadows encroaching upon their world. The game of heroes and monsters was no mere tale, and Aelric was now its central player, his every decision rippling through the fate of his village and beyond. As the first light of dawn attempted to pierce the gloom that clung to Ealdor, Aelric and Morrigan convened in the old forge, now transformed into a war room. Maps of the surrounding lands were spread across the large oak table, weighed down by stones and the heavy reality of the coming struggle. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows that played across Morrigan's stoic face as she traced routes into the Valewood. The Valewood is more than a forest, Morrigan explained, her finger pausing over a particularly dense thicket marked with ancient runes. It is a living archive of our world's oldest magic. What lies at its heart could hold the key to reinforcing the barrier between our worlds. Aelric leaned over the map, his eyes tracing the serpentine paths that wound through the woods. So many secrets lie in the shadows of those trees, he mused, feeling the weight of history and duty press upon him. And the spirits, the apparitions we saw last night, what of them? They are merely the first whispers of chaos, drawn to the sword's awakening, Morrigan replied, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that bordered on fervent. But they will grow louder, and soon. We must strengthen our defenses and prepare for what is to come. The day was spent in preparation. Aelric trained with the sword under Morrigan's watchful eye, each movement revealing more of the blade's capabilities. It sang through the air, a clear, ringing note that seemed to dispel the persistent fog of unease. With every strike, Aelric felt a surge of power, as if the sword not only channeled his own strength but something much older. Your father was a guardian before you, Morrigan said during a brief respite, her voice softening as she looked at Aelric with a mixture of respect and sorrow. He knew the cost of wielding such power, the sacrifices it demanded. Aelric paused, his grip tightening on the hilt of the sword. My father, the guardian. And what am I? The blacksmith who dreams of battles? His thoughts were a whirlwind, struggling to reconcile the father he remembered with the guardian Morrigan described. He never told me, Aelric finally said, his voice a mix of confusion and anger. He kept this all hidden, even from me. He wanted to protect you, perhaps to spare you from this burden, Morrigan suggested, her eyes not leaving the blade that seemed almost alive between them. The training continued into the evening, each session more grueling than the last, pushing Aelric's physical and mental boundaries. Around them, the village braced for the unknown, fortifying doors and whispering prayers. Elda, the herb woman, distributed potions for strength and clarity to the villagers, her hands steady even as her eyes betrayed her fear. As night fell, the air grew thick with anticipation. Aelric, standing at the edge of the village with Morrigan, looked toward the Valewood, its depths now shimmering with a strange, unnatural light. The forest called to him, a siren song of power and danger. We will venture into the Valewood at dawn, Morrigan declared, her voice resolute. We must find the heart of the forest, the source of its ancient magic, and reinforce the barriers before it's too late. Aelric nodded, his resolve hardening like the steel of his blade. Tonight, he would not sleep. Instead, he walked among the villagers, offering words of encouragement, his presence a reassurance. He met their eyes, saw their fear, their hope, and he felt the leader's mantle settle upon his shoulders. In the quiet hours before dawn, Aelric returned to the forge. He stoked the fire until it roared to life, the flames reflecting in his eyes as he pondered the path that lay ahead. The sword lay beside him, its glow steady and comforting. Tomorrow we face our fears, he thought, the fire's crackle a companion to his silent vigil. Tomorrow, I follow in my father's footsteps, not just as his son, but as a guardian of Ealdor. In the dim hours before dawn, Ealdor lay wrapped in a silent expectancy, its every inhabitant holding their breath as if the very air around them was charged with fate. As the first light of day touched the tops of the ancient trees that guarded the village, Aelric and Morrigan made their final preparations, their figures silhouetted against the flickering light of the forge. Armed with the radiant sword and flanked by Morrigan, whose knowledge of ancient magics was as deep as the Valewood itself, Aelric led a small contingent of villagers. Each was chosen for their bravery and unyielding spirit, including Elda, whose potions hung from every belt, glinting in the nascent light. As they approached the forest's edge, the air grew dense, as if the very atmosphere resisted their entrance. The trees of the Valewood, towering and ancient, stood like silent sentinels, their branches whispering secrets in a language lost to time. The path before them, shrouded in mists that seemed to swallow the very sound of their steps, led deep into the heart of the forest. "This path has not felt the tread of mortal feet for many ages," Morrigan whispered, her voice barely rising above the murmur of the leaves. "The forest remembers, though, and it watches." Aelric felt the sword pulse at his side, as if in response to Morrigan's words. With each step, the weight of his father's legacy pressed upon him, a tangible reminder of the duty that now drove him forward. "Am I ready to face what lies within?" he pondered, his grip tightening around the sword's hilt. The deeper they ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. Shadows moved with a life of their own, darting between trees and behind thickets, always just out of sight. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of earth and decay, a testament to the cycle of life and death that had dominated these woods for eons. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a low growl. From the underbrush, spectral forms emerged, their figures blurred and shifting, more shadow than substance. The villagers tightened their ranks, eyes wide with fear, but Aelric stepped forward, the sword now glowing brightly, its light a beacon in the oppressive gloom. With a swift motion, he drew the blade, its song a clear, ringing call that seemed to pierce the shadows. The apparitions recoiled as if burned, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. The villagers watched in awe, their fear momentarily forgotten in the face of Aelric's resolve. "We must keep moving," Aelric commanded, his voice steady. "The heart of the Valewood awaits, and with it, our destiny." They pressed on, the forest occasionally opening to reveal clearings that seemed untouched by time. In one such glade, they found a circle of stones, ancient and covered in moss, their arrangement deliberate and precise. Morrigan paused, her eyes scanning the glyphs carved into each stone. "These are old wards, meant to protect the heart of the forest from those who would seek to harm it," she explained, tracing her fingers over the smooth surface of a particularly large stone. "They are weakened but not broken. We can strengthen them, but it will require all our focus and strength." Gathering in the center of the stone circle, the group formed a pact, their spirits united by a shared purpose. Morrigan began to chant, her words in the old tongue, melodious and haunting. The air around them thickened, the energy pulsing with the power of the land itself. Aelric, standing at the center, raised the sword above his head. The blade ignited with a brilliant light, its radiance spilling over the stones, washing them in purity and strength. The wards hummed, a sound felt more than heard, as the magic sealed itself once more. Exhausted but elated, the group shared a moment of quiet triumph. Their journey was far from over, but this victory, this renewal of ancient protections, was a sign. The Veilwood, for all its shadows and dangers, recognized their intent and perhaps accepted their presence. As they left the circle, the forest seemed less foreboding, the path clearer as if acknowledging their right to pass. Aelric knew then that the true test still awaited them at the heart of the Veilwood, where the deepest magic held sway. But for now, he walked forward, not just as a blacksmith or a son, but as a true guardian of Ealdor, his father's sword a testament to his right to claim that title. The deeper the small band ventured into the heart of the Veilwood, the more the forest seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Mist curled around their feet like living things, and the canopy above stitched a tapestry of light and shadow that played tricks on the eyes. Aelric led with a solemn determination, the sword at his side now a constant source of warmth and a beacon against the creeping dread that filled the air. As they moved, the path became less defined, swallowed by the undergrowth and ancient roots that seemed to move back into place after they passed. Morrigan, her eyes always scanning the environment, muttered incantations that kept the most malevolent spirits at bay. But Aelric knew that magic here was a tangled web, and every protective spell might well draw curious eyes deeper in the shadows. "We are close," Morrigan whispered, her voice barely audible over the chorus of the forest. Her hand gestured to a veil of vines that draped over what appeared to be a cavern entrance. "The heart of Veilwood, where the oldest magic dwells, and where the veil between worlds grows thin." Aelric paused, his hand on the hilt of his sword, feeling its pulse quicken. "What will we find in the darkness of the heart?" he thought, his resolve mingling with a rush of adrenaline. The boundary between fear and excitement blurred, each step forward a defiance of the unknown. With a nod from Morrigan, they approached the cavern. The air grew cooler, and the light from the sword cast elongated shadows against the rocky walls, dancing as if alive. They stepped inside, and the world outside seemed to disappear, swallowed by a silence so deep it roared in Aelric's ears. Inside the cavern, the air was thick with the power of old magic. Glowing fungi clung to the damp walls, casting a pale, eerie light that illuminated paths winding deeper underground. The ground beneath their feet was smooth, worn by centuries or perhaps millennia of use. This was a place of power, a sacred place that Aelric felt in his bones was both sanctified and cursed. Morrigan led them to the heart of the cavern, where a crystal-clear pool reflected the faint light, doubling the room's luminosity. "This is the source," she said, her voice echoing slightly off the stone. "The water here flows from the lifeblood of the earth itself. It is pure and potent, a conduit for elemental magic." Aelric approached the pool, the reflection of the sword shimmering on the surface. He saw his face, older and wearier than he remembered, framed by the light of the blade. "Is this what my father saw when he faced his destiny?" The thought was a whisper in his mind, but it echoed like a shout in the still air. "We must use the sword to renew the seal," Morrigan instructed, breaking his reverie. "But be warned, the act may draw unwanted attention. Are you prepared?" With a deep breath, Aelric nodded, lifting the sword with both hands. As the tip touched the water, a brilliant light exploded from the blade, enveloping him in a blinding glow. The water began to ripple outward from where the sword touched, waves of energy pulsing through the cavern. Then, the tranquility shattered. A thunderous sound roared through the cavern as if the very earth were splitting. From the pool, shadows began to rise, coalescing into forms both terrible and awe-inspiring, creatures of myth, wrought from water and darkness, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The villagers stepped back, but Aelric stood firm, the sword now alive with power in his hands. "I am the guardian of Ealdor," he declared loudly, his voice carrying the weight of his lineage. "By blood and blade, I claim dominion over this place." The creatures paused, as if considering his words, then attacked. The battle was fierce, with Aelric at the center, the sword cutting through shadow and substance alike. Each swing felt guided by generations of guardians before him, each block an echo of battles fought long ago. As the last of the shadow creatures dissolved into mist, the cavern grew calm once more. The pool's surface settled, reflecting only the light of the sword and the faces of those who bore witness. They had defended the heart of the Valewood, strengthened the Vale, and affirmed their right to protect it. Exhausted but victorious, Aelric plunged the sword into the ground beside the pool, where it stood, humming softly, a permanent guardian in its own right. He looked at his companions, their faces lit by the glow of the blade, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. As they left the cavern, the path seemed clearer, the forest less foreboding, as if accepting Aelric not just as a blacksmith or a son, but as a true guardian of the ancient and mystical Valewood. The journey back through the Valewood was different. The path they tread was not just a physical one, but a passage transformed by victory and sealed with newfound alliances. The forest, once a looming spectre of dread, now seemed to bow in a quiet respect as Aelric passed, the sword still resonating softly from its place at his side. Each step was lighter, each breath a little easier, as if the very air had been cleansed by their actions. Aelric's thoughts, however, were tumultuous. With the physical battle won, the struggle within him grew. Have I truly accepted this mantle? Or does the sword guide me more than I wield it? The weight of leadership was a tangible thing, pressing upon him with every glance from his companions, every nod of respect from those he had once considered his equals. As they emerged from the canopy's cover, the first light of dawn greeted them, a sliver of gold slicing through the perpetual twilight that hung over Ealdor. The village itself appeared on the horizon, a silhouette painted against the lightening sky, its familiar shapes a reminder of the life Aelric had momentarily left behind. The return was quiet, a procession marked not by fanfare but by a solemn acknowledgement of the trials they had endured. The villagers who met them at the edge of the Valewood looked on with a mix of awe and fear, their eyes drawn to the gleaming blade that Aelric carried. Whispers filled the air, tales of the night's events already morphing into legend. Morrigan, walking beside Aelric, remained a figure of mystery, her gaze scanning the horizons as if searching for signs of further trouble. "The balance is restored for now," she murmured, her voice a low note that seemed to blend with the morning breeze. "But the forces we dealt with will not forget. Nor will they forgive." Aelric nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in his heart. "Then we will be ready. We will train, and we will fortify. Ealdor will not fall while I stand." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Under Aelric's direction, the villagers reinforced the walls and gates, using techniques both old and new to ensure their safety. Training grounds were established, where Aelric and Morrigan taught the arts of war and magic to those willing to learn. The sword, ever present, became a symbol of their resilience, its blade catching the light of endless twilight and reflecting it back as if in defiance of the darkness that lingered beyond their borders. One evening, as the sky deepened to a richer shade of twilight, Aelric stood atop the highest tower of the village, looking out over the land. The Valewood was a dark line on the horizon, a border between the known and the unknown. His thoughts drifted to his father, to the secrets and burdens passed down through blood and steel. "Did you stand here, father, watching over the land as I do now?" Turning, Aelric descended the tower to walk among his people. Their faces, once marked by fear, now showed signs of strength and determination. Elda approached him, her hands clutching a bundle of herbs and potions. "For strength and clarity," she said, echoing the words she had spoken before their journey into the Valewood. "To keep our minds sharp and our bodies ready." "Thank you, Elda," Aelric replied, accepting her gift. He knew that the peace they had fought for was fragile, a temporary reprieve in a continuing struggle. Later, by the light of a fire that crackled with hopeful flames, Aelric met with his council, newly formed from among the bravest and wisest of the village. Together, they planned for the future, discussing alliances and strategies, the distribution of resources, and the training of militias. Morrigan, ever the enigmatic ally, spoke of the wider world, of forces that watched and waited, her stories a tapestry as complex and interwoven as the shadows of the Veilwood. As the fire died down to embers, Aelric felt a sense of purpose solidify within him. This was his life now, not just as a guardian of a blade but as a leader of people. He had stepped into the role shaped by his heritage and his heart, a role he now embraced fully. In the quiet that followed, as the last of the council members departed, Aelric stood alone, watching the stars emerge in the gaps between the lingering twilight. The Veilwood, a dark silhouette against the night sky, no longer seemed a threat but a challenge, a reminder of the ever-present balance between light and dark, and of his duty to maintain it. The days that followed were tense, charged with the expectancy of a storm on the horizon. Under Aelric's steadfast command, Ealdor had transformed. Its once quiet and unassuming streets now thrummed with the purposeful activity of a village bracing for more than just winter. But even as they prepared, a shadow loomed larger and deeper than the twilight that veiled the land. The true test of Aelric's leadership approached with the rising of a rare celestial event, an eclipse that promised to cloak the world in an unnatural darkness. It was not merely a turning of the heavens, but a sign, foretold by Morrigan as a potential catalyst for darker forces to gather strength. As the eclipse drew near, Morrigan's demeanor grew increasingly troubled. When the sun hides its face, the veil between worlds thins dangerously, she explained one evening as they walked the parapets, watching the workers fortify the last of the barricades. It is not only a symbol of change but a gateway. Aelric felt the weight of her words. A gateway for what? He pondered. The sword at his side seemed to hum in response, its glow a faint but steady pulse against the gathering chill. And you believe they will attempt to break through during the eclipse? It is likely, Morrigan replied, her eyes scanning the darkening woods beyond the village walls. The energy released is a beacon for those who seek to exploit the powers of the Veilwood. Preparations intensified, with Aelric overseeing the training of the militia and the fortification of magical wards. Elda and her apprentices distributed potions that glowed with a soft luminescence, crafted to enhance the villagers' resilience against spectral forces. On the eve of the eclipse, Aelric stood before his people in the village square, the sword raised high. The steel caught the last of the sunlight, casting a radiant arc over the crowd. "This darkness will pass," he proclaimed, his voice resonant and clear. "Stand with me, stand with each other, and we will hold the light." As the eclipse began, a hush fell over Ealdor. The sky darkened rapidly, swallowing the sun behind a perfect circle of black. Aelric felt every hair on his arm stand as the temperature dropped, a cold that seeped into the bones and the very stone beneath their feet. Then, as the sun vanished, the expected silence of all was shattered by a rumble, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. From the forest edge, a chilling fog rolled forth, within which shadowy figures moved with predatory grace. The Veilwood itself appeared to come alive, its ancient trees groaning under the weight of impending invasion. With Morrigan at his side, Aelric rallied his forces at the village gates. The first wave of shadow creatures surged forward, more substantial than any specters they had faced before, their forms solidifying under the eclipse's dark mantle. The clash of steel rang out, a desperate symphony of survival against the encroaching dark. Aelric fought at the forefront, the sword a blazing trail of light in the gloom, each swing both a defiance and a declaration. With Morrigan's chants weaving protective spells around them, they pushed back against the tide. Yet, for every shadow they dispelled, another seemed to rise. As the battle wore on, a figure emerged from the mists, taller and more formidable than the others. Its eyes burned with a malice that seemed to strip the warmth from the air. Aelric stepped forward to meet it, his resolve as much a weapon as the blade he wielded. Their duel was a clash of light against dark, the sound of metal against shadow reverberating through the air like thunder. Aelric's arms ached with the strain, each block and parry a test of his endurance and will. With a mighty heave, Aelric finally drove the sword through the shadow's heart, the blade's light bursting forth in a radiant explosion that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The shadow creature let out a wail as it dissolved into nothingness, its demise a signal to the others. As quickly as they had come, the shadows receded, withdrawing into the forest as the sun began to peek from behind the moon, its light tentative but growing stronger. Breathing heavily, Aelric looked around at the weary but unbroken lines of his people. Together they had held back the darkness. He lifted the sword, its light now steady and bright, a beacon once more. The villagers gathered around, their cheers filling the newly brightened day. Aelric met their gazes, seeing not just relief but a renewed spirit of courage and unity. They had defended not just their homes, but their very existence against forces that sought to undo the fabric of their world. As the eclipse receded completely, leaving a clear sky in its wake, Aelric felt a profound connection to the land he protected, to the people he led, and to the legacy he carried. The battle was won, but the war, he knew, would bring new challenges. Yet, with his companions by his side and the sword in his hand, he was ready to meet whatever came next, under the light of the sun or the shadow of the moon. The aftermath of the eclipse left Ealdor transformed, not just in its defenses but in the very spirit of its people. As the final shadows retreated back into the depths of the Valewood, a palpable sense of relief swept through the village, mingling with an unspoken resolve that echoed in the determined steps and resolute glances of its inhabitants. Aelric stood amidst his people, the weight of the sword in his hand now a familiar comfort. The village square was alive with activity, a stark contrast to the silent anticipation of the night before. Villagers moved with a purpose, repairing what little damage the shadows had wrought, their movements vigorous and faces marked by a newfound vigor. Children laughed, their games infused with mock battles and heroic tales, no doubt inspired by the night's events. Aelric, walking through the square, was met with nods and words of gratitude. The sword, now sheathed, was a symbol of their victory and his leadership. But the gaze that met his was not merely of thankfulness but of respect, a recognition of his role not just as a protector but as a leader who had stood firm against the darkness. Morrigan approached, her expression one of cautious relief. "You have done well, Aelric. But remember, the forces we faced will regroup. The eclipse was but a moment, and moments pass." Aelric looked toward the horizon, where the dark line of the Valewood lay against the sky, a reminder of the world beyond their borders. "We will remain vigilant," he affirmed. "Ealdor has stood many tests, and it will stand many more. Our preparations will continue." The days that followed were a flurry of activity. Under Aelric's direction, training sessions were intensified, and the fortifications strengthened. The sword was not merely an artifact but a beacon of their resilience, its presence in the training fields a constant reminder of the battles fought and those still to come. Ealdor, ever the provider of potions and herbs, set up a workshop to teach the art of her craft. The knowledge of healing and protection spread through the village, empowering the villagers not just to defend but to recover and thrive. As the new structures rose, so too did the stories of that fateful night. The tale of the eclipse and the battle against the shadows woven into the fabric of Ealdor's history, tales that would be told and retold, each telling reinforcing the unity and courage of its people. A week after the eclipse, Aelric organized a feast in the village square. Tables were laden with the bounty of their harvest, and fires roared against the coming chill of the evening. The village gathered, the air filled with the aromas of roasted meats and freshly baked bread. Standing before his people, Aelric raised his glass. "To Ealdor, and to all who protect her. May we always find light in the darkness, and strength in our unity." The feast went long into the night, filled with music and laughter, a celebration of their survival and a testament to their strength. But as the fires burned down to embers, Aelric found himself walking to the edge of the village, where the trees of the Valewood whispered in the gentle night breeze. There, in the quiet, Aelric reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the forge to the front lines of a battle not just for Ealdor but for the very fabric of the world. The sword at his side, once his father's burden, now felt like his own, a weight he was not just born to bear but one he had chosen. Gazing into the depths of the Valewood, Aelric felt a peace settle over him. The forest, once a source of fear, now held a promise. It was a reminder of the challenges to come, but also of the victories they had claimed. With a steady hand he touched the hilt of his sword, its surface cool under his fingers. "Whatever comes," he whispered into the night, "we are ready." Turning back to the village, the lights of the feast twinkling like stars against the darkness, Aelric walked back to join his people. With each step, the resolve in his heart grew stronger, fortified by the knowledge that no matter what shadows may come, the light of Ealdor would never falter. As the new day dawned over Ealdor, the village awoke to a rhythm of newfound purpose and strength. Aelric, having watched over the remnants of the feast's embers through the small hours of the night, stood contemplating the horizon where the dark silhouette of the Vale would mark the boundaries of known lands. The air was crisp, the aftermath of the celebration leaving a lingering scent of smoke and roasted meats, a testament to the community's resilience. In the heart of the village, the forge, the place where Aelric had shaped iron and steel, where he had dreamed of larger worlds beyond the Unveil, had transformed. Now it served not only as a place for smithing but as a center for gathering and planning. The clang of hammer on metal still rang out, but it was accompanied by the murmur of voices discussing repair and construction, tactics and training. Elda approached Aelric in the early morning light, a basket of herbs in her arm, her expression one of serene determination. "The roots and leaves have responded well to the new soils we mixed, based on the old texts you found," she shared, her eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and mischief. "It seems your legacy is not just in defending, but in nurturing, Aelric." He smiled, taking a sprig from her basket and smelling the fresh, earthy aroma. "We learn from the past to build the future, Elda. What we do today will grow beyond us." His gaze drifted to the children who played nearby, their games now mimicking the tasks of adults, building, protecting, learning. As the morning progressed, Aelric convened a meeting with the village council in the newly established meeting hall next to the forge. The room was simple, with long wooden tables and benches made from the sturdy oaks of Ealdor. Maps and plans were rolled out in front of them, the ink still fresh on parchment. "We've fortified our borders, trained our people, and strengthened our resolve," Aelric began, his voice carrying the weight of his experiences. "But we must also look beyond our borders. The Valewood, vast and filled with ancient magics, holds both threats and opportunities. We must explore, learn, and possibly even ally with those who dwell within." Morrigan, who had taken her place by the window, nodded slowly. "The forest is a gateway, but it is also a guardian. By understanding it, we not only protect Ealdor but also respect the balance of the natural world." Her gaze met Aelric's, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared path forward. The council discussed potential expeditions into the Valewood, considering both the risks and rewards. Young scouts, trained under Aelric's and Morrigan's watchful eyes, were eager to prove their skills while gathering knowledge and resources that could benefit the village. As the meeting adjourned, Aelric stood by the door, watching his people disperse to their duties. He felt a surge of pride, not just for what they had endured but for how they thrived. Turning to go back to the forge, he paused, noticing a new batch of young apprentices waiting eagerly for their lessons to begin. With a nod to his old master's hammer, which now hung ceremonially above the forge, Aelric picked up his own. "Every strike shapes more than metal," he said to the apprentices, who listened intently. "It shapes our future." Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life in Ealdor continued with a vibrant tenacity. The village not only recovered but grew, drawing curious traders and wandering scholars, drawn by tales of a village that stood firm against the darkness, protected by a guardian with a legendary blade. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows over the land, Aelric returned to the forge. Alone, he placed the sword on the anvil, the cool metal glowing faintly in the dim light. "We are more than the sum of our battles," he reflected quietly. tracing the lines of the blade with a soot-blackened finger. The legacy of the sword, of his father, and of Ealdor itself was not bound by the confines of steel and handle but was woven into the very lives of the people he led. As he turned to stoke the forge's fire, preparing for another day's work, Aelric felt a profound connection to the village, to its past and its promising future. And outside, as the stars began to pepper the sky, the Valewood whispered in the gentle breeze, a reminder of mysteries yet to uncover and stories yet to be told. Aelric smiled, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, the forge warm and inviting, a beacon of light in the twilight of Ealdor. Thank you for sharing a moment of your day with me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Really helps a lot. If you don't, well, I'll still love you. Thanks for stopping by.